All right, out with your gum.
Hmm?
Out with your gum.
Okay, this won't hurt, and it'll be over in just a moment.
Uh-huh. What's that?
Conductant.
A little dab will do you. That right, Mr. Jackson?
Here we go.
From as early as the 19th century, mental illnesses were thought to be a mysterious physical affliction or punishment for sin. Those who were mentally ill were immediately deemed deranged and fully isolated from society in efforts to correct their insanity and to shield society from their contagious ways. As large state institutions grew exponentially, many condemned under-specialized care, overcrowding, and the overall dismal conditions faced by the patients. After World War II, the field of psychology was revolutionized as the advocates for the mentally ill and the medical community pushed for more humane treatment and full legal rights. The first insane asylum opened in Williamsburg, Pennsylvania in 1769 by Benjamin Rush. Benjamin Rush was considered America's first psychiatrist. In Europe, many asylums used whips, chains, and straitjackets. Rush didn't integrate many of the cruel methods used in Europe at the time. However, Rush did believe in tranquilizing chairs, the gyrator, which strapped a patient to a board and violently flipped and spun them around, and the circulating swing. Unfortunately, shock therapy was also used, which provoked a seizure for the purpose of healing the mind. This torturous treatment was prevalent in asylums along with lobotomies, which consisted of driving a rod into the brain of a patient. 50 years later, another asylum was born in Philadelphia. The American Friends Asylum used moral treatment as a breakthrough for patients. In this asylum, chains and restraints weren't used. Violent patients were even isolated from other patients. After seeing the still primitive treatment of patients, Dorothea Dix built over 5 humane hospitals for the mentally ill. While mental hospitals were increasing, the number of accusations of women and children being diseased increased as well. Many alcoholics, depressed people, women in menopause, and disobedient people were also accused of being mentally insane, and were then sent to asylums that were unsatisfactory. Dorothea Dix recognized this and started the first wave of asylum reform in 1840. Dorothea believed that the mentally ill should be helped and later reintegrated into society, rather than living in torturous prisons. These monumental figures paved a pathway for deinstitutionalization and asylum reform to continue in subsequent years. As America gradually emerged from a past consisting of inhumane treatment towards the mentally ill, great strides were taken to revitalize the methods in which the mentally ill were dealt with. Changes in American lifestyle encouraged the surfacing of new outlooks and heightened the debate surrounding deinstitutionalization. The dawn of World War II instigated a new awareness for the prominence of mental illness in America. As men of all backgrounds attempted to enlist in the armed forces, 1 in 8 were rejected based on psychological complications. As the tally of allegedly mentally ill continued to grow, massive state institutions struggled to ensure vacancies, thus creating overcrowded facilities that failed to accommodate the escalating number of individuals. Many who were not enlisted in the armed forces worked as conscientious objectors. Over 2,000 men were stationed in institutions nationwide to oversee all activities and keep watch over the patients. Upon arriving, it was no secret that the institutions were in dire need of reform. A life expose in 1946 documented the overcrowding and highlighted the dismal conditions. From the atrocities observed materialized a newfound sense of ambition to pursue much-needed reform. This sparked the initial flame to take steps to begin to remove individuals out of large institutions and into the community. However, deinstitutionalization initially created far more problems than it did fix. From 1955 to 1965, institution populations had only decreased by a meager 1.75%. and for the many who were released, years of isolation resulted in no steady source of income, limited social contacts, and no home. As hospitals pushed to release patients, those who were discharged had no support system and were consequently left without adequate treatment. This essentially left 2.2 million individuals without medical treatment and over 1 million homeless. With deinstitutionalization exhibiting little to no positive change in society, many were reluctant to support it and ultimately questioned the value of integrating the mentally ill into society. Despite deinstitutionalization's precarious start, the National Institute of Mental Health and the American Psychiatric Association tirelessly fought to improve treatment methods. In addition, amendments to Social Security in 1965 increased hospital costs, thus giving the federal government an incentive to pursue deinstitutionalization in a more serious manner. Making its first launch in 1965, Medicare and Medicaid stimulated local nursing homes, which provided a more personal environment for the mentally ill. In addition, public housing units were gradually provided for the mentally ill. As social welfare programs expanded, populations in mental hospitals decreased by 8.6% per year. The National Institute of Mental Health also funded research to develop new, humane drugs, such as phenothiazines, to control a patient's behavior and predictability. As the psychiatric revolution for deinstitutionalization continued to surge on, there were different junctures where the government intervened with critical legislation. In 1946, Harry Truman signed the National Mental Health Act, which not only established the National Institute of Mental Health, but also worked to dilute the high concentration of mentally ill individuals in state institutions. On February 5, 1963, John F. Kennedy proposed the National Community Health Centers Act, which stated, "The chief aim is to get people out of the state custodial institutions and back into their communities and homes." Lastly, on May 15, 1979, President Jimmy Carter established the Mental Health System Act, which provided mental health services and worked to avoid unnecessary institutionalization. President Carter claimed that he would reduce the number of Americans robbed of vital and satisfying lives by mental illness. In 1955, 529,000 patients were admitted in massive state institutions. By 1974, the number decreased to 216,000, and by 1990, the number fell to 110,000 patients. By 1975, patients in state institutions had declined by 62%. Despite such impressive achievements, society still struggles to provide adequate institution facilities. The fight continues. In the time period from the 1980s to the present, the deinstitutionalization movement continued to wage on at full force. Society still strives to weed out state institutions that are draining money from the government and inhumanely treating patients. The Citizen Commission on Human Rights plays an active role in this, and helped to crack down on hospitals like St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C., in May of 2006. It was reported that this hospital secluded its patients for long amounts of time to compensate for staff shortages. The situation at St. Elizabeth's is, unfortunately, not uncommon. In March of 2004, an investigation of a Vermont state psychiatric hospital revealed inhumane treatment. A report claimed that the institution consistently used seclusion and restraint as an intervention of first resort. Improved government care programs have decreased the general amount of inpatients in state institutions. From the 1990s to the present, trends of improved social welfare, outpatient mental health care, criminal justice, and nursing home care have risen and successfully rehabilitated the mentally ill. Despite some advances in the psychiatric realm, controversy still surrounds the deinstitutionalization movement to this day. The medical field and society at large still work tenaciously to revolutionize and reform methods to care for the mentally ill. While monumental strides have been made in educating society about the hardships faced by the mentally ill, outdated treatment and an overall lack of consideration towards the rights of the mentally ill still lingers. As society has moved away from outdated methods, the psychiatric revolution continues to surge on.